recorded, and let's record my intro because I forgot that bit last time. And Turn the Page is now being run by a group of some of the incredible women who have been coming to the fair since the beginning. So Jules and myself are both still involved, as are some of the sort of best of the local book artists, really, around Norwich and the Norfolk surrounds. And we're very lucky to be able to run it in such beautiful and collaborative fashion, very in keeping with the feeling of the fair itself since its launch, really. It's always felt like a community event, much as book artists to me always feels like a sort of very community oriented art form. So it's very nice. And we decided very quickly that we wouldn't even attempt to have something in person this year, that it was never going to work. And so we'd try and do something exciting online. So every month, the Turn the Page website and social media feeds have been celebrating a year from the history of the fair. And we have put on these two events to celebrate the two symposiums that have been held in person at the forum. We are hoping that we will be able to return in person to the forum next May and see each other together in a space and share in each other's books again. And what a joy that will be. So everybody keep your fingers crossed. But until then, we have this. So thank God for the internet. So this afternoon, we are going to have a wonderful shared talk with a video from Kate and Sian, who have been working together on a creative project. And I'm not going to say much more than that, because when I'm giving a talk, I always find it slightly boring when the speaker steals the introduction to my talk by telling everybody who I am. And I'm like, that's how I was going to start, but oh well. So instead, I'm going to hand over to them. I'm going to make sure that a little bit of Zoom admin, if you could all make sure you're muted other than our speaker, that would be great. It looks to me like you all are, which is fantastic. And Kate and Sian are going to be sharing their screens. So Zoom should, when they share screens, depending on whether you've got it on speaker view or gallery view, you may or may not be able to see Kate or Sian. So if you want to make sure you can, I would have it on speaker view, as they will be the only one that is speaking, or I would find their lovely little box, and in the top right hand corner of their screen, if you hover your cursor over it, there's 3 little dots, and it brings a drop down menu that will allow you to pin the speaker. So I don't know whether Kate or Sian's, who's going first? Sorry. Sian's going first. So if you want to pin Sian to the top of your screen to make sure you can see her, then do feel free. And there might be more people coming, so I will keep letting people in if there are. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Sian.
Thank you very much. My name is Sian Prosser. I'm the librarian and archivist at the Royal Astronomical Society. And as well as it being fantastic to talk to you along with Kate about Kate's wonderful work of art inspired by the library, it's also a huge pleasure to talk to you all and share books from our wonderful library. And I'll just take a few minutes to set the scene, to introduce some aspects of the collection that inspired Kate. But it's the video in which we will actually show to you physically the works that she was drawing on. So this is a photograph of
one. Sorry, Sian.
Yes.
Can everybody see Sian's PowerPoint? Because I can't.
I can.
Is it because my camera? Is it because I'm pinned?
Possibly, but you're not on mine. I don't know.
Shall I stop my video? Does that help?
No. If everybody else can see it, just give me one. Sorry, I don't know. I just want to make sure, as it's being recorded here, that this is going to be working properly. There we go. That should be better. Okay, continue.
Okay.
Forgive me.
That's fine. So this is a photograph of Open House. Normally we take part in Open House London and welcome hundreds of people into the building. We haven't been able to do that so much, but we do look forward to being able to host visits and guided tours to the library when it's safe. At the moment, the library is still partially open for individual research visits, I'm glad to say. So the Royal Astronomical Society was founded in 1820, and that means we've been around for just over 200 years. We celebrated our bicentenary last year. What a year to have a series of very detailed and exciting events planned, I must say, but it could have been a lot worse. This is one of the poster sessions from the National Astronomy meeting, which we hold every year. And basically for the last 200 years, we have been holding scientific meetings, we've been publishing research. We have about 4,000 members, that's students, professional astronomers, amateur astronomers, teachers of astronomy, people who work in the space industry. And it's quite a wide range of interests that people have in this subject. So one of the activities that we've been engaged in over the last 200 years is collecting books and papers to help people with their research interest in astronomy. Like in the first meeting of the society, it's recorded that books were donated to, to found the library collection. So we have some really interesting historical books and papers, as well as contemporary books and textbooks that people can still use for current awareness and undergraduate courses, etc. This is our library catalogue, and this is just one of the shelves in our rare book collection. I'm often asked, what is the oldest item that you have in your collection? Is that not actually a printed book? It's a 14th century manuscript which contains planetary tables, which allowed members of the clergy to establish on what days people could celebrate the feasts of the church calendar. And so we have books, we have manuscript observations and many ephemera, and we have books that are not just interesting from an antiquarian point of view, but it's working in a place like the Royal Astronomical Society. It's very much about preserving the history of the discipline of astronomy, and that there are so many key figures that we could talk about. If this was open house, I would have brought out our first edition of Newton's Principia, and some of the really early star atlases. I've just got a photograph here of a chart from Johannes Kepler's De Stella Nova, the new star, which is one of his many key texts. It shows in the foot of Fuchsius, who is the gentleman in the center of this picture, also known as Serpentaris. So it shows what was actually a supernova, a newly discovered star, in 1606. So he recorded that, but that's not the only thing that he was known for. He was also the person who, a great mathematician using the observations of another astronomer was able to, called Tycho Brahe, who we'll talk about in the video, was able to establish what are now known as the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are still used today. They're absolutely fundamental to planetary science. And if you're doing an undergraduate astronomy course now, you will learn how to calculate the mass of a planet using the mathematics that were drawn up by or developed first by Johannes Kepler and then built upon by people like Isaac Newton. So absolutely fundamental, and he means a great deal to the astronomers of the society. There's a little, the detail here shows a portrait of Kepler, which is from the basis of this engraving of a temple, which appears on the frontispiece of his magnum opus, the Tabulae Rudolphinae, which fed into Kate's work in great detail. So here's I'm not going to go into detail on the laws of ellipses and the laws of equal areas, because I can, even though I did some evening courses in astronomy, I have a very shaky understanding of them, but they are there. And his mathematical work fed into the creation of very detailed tables, which, as well as the beautiful illustrations that you see in charts and star atlases, tables of numbers and figures like this were absolutely crucial to astronomers being able to do their work of observation and predicting the motions of the planets. So that's just one example of a key astronomer from the past whose work is preserved in our library. I just want to say that I really loved working with Kate and building up this relationship of trust, bringing her behind the scenes. On the left, we have a very moody atmospheric shot of a place called the Annex, which is an area of the library which contains lots of reserve journals, but also some photographic glass plates, which there's thousands of them. I've been in the process of recataloguing them, rehousing them, and digitizing them and bringing them to a wider audience. And we've come across treasures like this lovely stereoscopic lantern slide of the lunar photographic, of the lunar surface that was based on a photograph by the pioneering astrophotographer Warren de la Rue. And this is just another example of a work that Kate, noticed and wanted to weave into the creation that she made. So, one of the great privileges of my work managing a very special collection is to see the connections and the new creations that are made by people like artists like Kate coming in and drawing all these threads together and making something completely new. And I will now hand over to Kate, who will expand a bit more on that, and I'll stop sharing this presentation.
Thank you, Sian. Shall I share screen now? You ready?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, let's see if we can escape, and I'll just put up the full screen. Great. Okay, have you all got that working? Is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sian. And it's really nice just to glimpse in to the annex again. I think there's a whole artist book to be made on the subject of annexes, and particularly that one. I'm just going to, my presentation, which is hopefully fairly brief, is going to be chronologically backwards. So normally when I talk about this work, I will talk about how I came to be involved, and we'll end on the work. In this case, I'm going to go the other way around, because the point of this is, for me, is going to contextualize the film which you're going to see. So what you're looking at now is the small body of work that I made in response to researching at the Royal Astronomical Society. The 3 small books at the bottom I'll come back to, and the large work Measuring the Heavens at the back. So that this is more of Measuring the Heavens, which was inspired by Johann Bayer's 1603 Uranometria, the translation of which is Measuring the Heavens. So we'll come back to this in the film, but what you're looking at is a box on the left, inside which is a folio and or a folder, and inside that sits this piece of text called Measuring the Heavens, which is actually a list of the sources inside it. And this was particularly based on this book because it's one of the first star atlases to have scientific observation in its measuring, and is also very beautiful. So inside that piece of paper that you saw on the right lives the concertina book, which you can see here on the right with this serpent coming out, who is the constellation Serpens. And he's heading in the sky, heading towards this disc on the right, which is made up of strips of data. And on the front of the book, you can see a raised image of a sextant. So more of this will be seen in the film, but this is just to give you a brief idea of how I work. So I work in a mix of digital and hand, making my prints and my artwork for screen printing. I'm particularly interested in the screen print coming from an industrial process into a more fine art area. And it's taken me a long time to learn Photoshop, but I can do it now, and I still choose to mix up the works. It gives me a sense of crafting what I'm doing, which is important to my practice. So this is the inner concertina book that belongs in Measuring the Heaven, which is over 1 meter long, and is joined by strips which are printed on both sides, and you'll see more of that in a minute. So that may feel like a rush through, but you will get more of it in the film in the middle. So this is how the book works together. It's, as you saw, boxed folio and paper. And the purpose of designing it in this way was because this piece of work is really about the library. It isn't about individual books. It's about how the whole works together. And working with Sian was a revelation to me to consider how information relates to each other and how the library relates to each other. So each part of this book opens and works together and can be seen as separate or as part of the whole. So it's coherent when put together, but you can get something from each part. I'm explaining that quite badly, but the library is a whole, it's an entity, and without all the different parts, it doesn't cohere and move forward. So the book is in the same way designed to be a library within itself. So that was really, I don't know if you're getting my full screen, because I'm getting, you are, okay. So this was the end of that. It was the culmination of the project, and you can see here Sian and I looking at it in the library, being shown alongside some of the books that influenced it. And that, for me, that was incredibly special to have that opportunity. And Sian very kindly said when we started to collaborate that we could exhibit it at the end alongside, or that she could. And I was really worried that the book wouldn't merit it. So it was very nice to see it in the cases, and it's such a great space to be in. So this is really how I got involved in the library. This is a project, an art science project called Creativity and Curiosity. And the two artists involved are Ione Parkin and Gillian McFarland. And they've been running this for some time, and they have been making their own work inspired by space, astrophysicists, cosmologists. And they work with people from universities and other artists, and they sometimes ask people to collaborate. And the collaboration, it can be just the work that you do and you come and work with them and exhibit it, or it can be a more active collaboration between them. And in my case, they asked me to come and research with them at the Royal Astronomical Society, with the Royal Astronomical Society's invitation. These slides are from the Hebridean Dark Skies Festival, which happened just like 2 weeks before lockdown in Stornoway, and Sian and I made it out to Stornoway and spoke at this festival, which was an audience full of astronomers, artists, and musicians, and it was great. And it can really show you how the bringing together of the science and the arts can be an incredibly creative experience. This is Ione talking about some of her mixed media on paper. And here is Gillian talking about a glass globe, which she makes with a glass blower. Gillian's work is very collaborative. And there's a little bit more here of Gillian's work, because Sian and I are going to work hopefully with Gillian on a new collaboration. So I just wanted to introduce you to her work. So the 3 prints that you can see in the back are her lunar prints. So she makes these steel discs, which are quite large, and then leaves them out for a lunar cycle, and then brings them in and prints from them. So they're kind of etchings of the moon, really, but they're very beautiful. And then the glass, which you can see in front, and then she works with pierced paper, which you can see around the central etching. So that's where it ended up, and that's who I worked with. And this is kind of how it began. So my practice as a book artist is basically inspired by the historical. So I make a contemporary response to historic sources. And this is a book that I made in 2017, just before Ione and Gillian invited me to the project. It's called Confined to the Library, and it was a commission from some academics at Bristol University for the Vice-Chancellor. And the idea behind it was that there's a new library being built, and the academics were very concerned that it would be digitizing a lot of the books, and that people wouldn't have the experience of sitting in a library, of sharing your desk with multiple volumes that are open, and the serendipity of wandering down a shelf and discovering something wonderful. So they asked me to make a book about libraries. So the flags that you can see in the center have the names of contemporary and ancient libraries. The main picture of the red you're looking at is the book, is the box which contains the book. And you can see where books have sort of been taken out of the library and books are still on the shelf and plied in the shapes. And the image on the left is the grey book sitting inside it, is a kind of shelving image. And inside the text is from the 14th century book by Richard de Bury about manuscripts in libraries, and texts that the academics gave me so that they could use their own words to describe their concerns. So in the same year, there was an exhibition at the Bodleian called Designing English. The guy called Professor Wakelin, who's a professor of paleography, and he decided to run a book arts competition alongside it called Redesigning Medieval Book. And they ran workshops at the Bodleian. I think about 40 of us went. And then we basically made books, and they selected the ones they wanted to exhibit, which mine was one. So they gave us a selection of texts which we could use if we chose to. And I chose to use a poem about curing toothache by making food and putting the names of saints on it. And it appealed to me because there's so many food fads going around now still. It didn't seem to me any weirder than what we're doing at the moment. So this is my book in the middle with the food sandwich on the front, and I made it for the wife of Bath using the colour red, which is described as wearing in Chaucer, and Cure for Toothache because she was famous for her gap tooth. And on the back, an English love poem. And this particular one sits inside the vellum slipcase that you can see, and inside the red box on the right. So skipping through Measuring the Heavens, which was the one in the middle, this is what I've just been working on now. This is just hot off the press, and is part of a project for Bristol University, two Bristol University academics and the book artists John McDowell and Sophie Loss, who are running this project Libri Nuovi, which is to celebrate 700 years since Dante's death. So we were asked to make, 8 of us were invited to make a book in response to Dante's work and life, any aspect that you chose, and these will be being shown alongside some works of book arts that have already been made in an exhibition and events at Bristol University next month. So if you look out for Libri Nuovi, if you're interested, that's where it'll be. And I put this in really just to show that this is still part of my practice, this response to the historic, but also the way that I work in the layering up of drawings and of text and imagery, which is appropriated from older books and reused, and then with my own drawings and responses inside of very much what I was doing at the library. So you can see at the bottom on the left, drawings after Botticelli, and then I like to hide things in it. So the silver and red is a reference to Dante's Politics, who were exemplified in the Guelphs, who used silver and red in their heraldry, and then there's overlaying of text. And on the right, leather printed tie, which ties the book together and comes from a bit of text in Dante's Commedia where he describes the demon Minos, and he wraps his tail around the sinners, and however many times he wraps the tail around is whatever circle of hell he gets sent to. So I quite like the idea of wrapping the book with these circles of hell. So that's my practice, and these are the little books that I made in the first response to the library. So this is me going to the library, sometimes with Ione from Creativity and Curiosity, meeting with Sian, being introduced to these books, and these are my sort of first response. So this is the Infinite M, inspired by Kepler's illustration, which you can see on the right. The M stands for Mundi, Latin for Earth, and it's about the idea that there is not just one planet, Mundi, which was Earth, which was the religious view of it, but that actually we are one of many. And this was put forward by the Dominican friar Giordano Bruno as the idea that it very much went against the church beliefs, and Bruno, and it was actually burned to the stake for heresy. So his ideas kind of got a bit beyond his safety measure, but he introduced this concept which later astronomers picked up, and I was interested in the idea of this overlaying of ideas, that you put forward an idea, someone else picks it up and it carries it forward. So there's nothing discrete and complete in astronomical books. They're all feeding each other and working together. And this is the Typographical Planet, which is a small book that folds out and is based here on the idea that Galileo's, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's a little Saturn in the printing on the right, which is Galileo's first printed vision of Saturn. And I was particularly struck looking at something that Sian showed me, that this tiny planet appeared the same size as text in a sort of almost nonchalant way, and it's extraordinary. And then on the left here, you can see this is the Typographical Planet Unbound. Systemia Saturnia by Christian Huygens and his comparative chart of images of Saturn, which just shows you how important printing was, because this is the gathering of information from people observing Saturn with their different ideas of what it looks like, rendered together in a chart. And so it progresses through showing people, and then the next person working from that and making their own observations. And I particularly like the image on the right of Saturn, which I printed in the blue, as I think it looks awfully like 1950s sci-fi, even though it's actually from the 17th century. So you can see that the books are, these small books are directly influenced by some of the books that Sian showed me, whereas Measuring the Heavens is a wider concept. And this was influenced by Peter Appian's book, Astronomicon Caesarium, which is totally extraordinary and which we're going to have a look at in the film, so I'm not going to talk very much about it. But this last little book is really a culmination of my realization of how important printing was to astronomy, and that the parallels between them as the ways in printing data and defining image became much clearer, that those two things couldn't have happened without each other. So as you can see from the text below, that's the this is a slightly of a sort of conclusion. And that was really the end of that phase. And at that stage, I then plucked up the courage to email Sian and say, I wondered if you might be interested in a collaboration. And I haven't worked with anybody as a collaborative artist before in this way. And so before the film begins, to say that the first time the emails began to fly between us, and they really did a lot of spelling out of where the boundaries might be. So mine was saying, what you say to me will be translated as an artist. And Sian was saying, I'm not going to make any art, but I'm happy to facilitate doing this. And so that's a really nice process. And I would just say to anybody, enjoy collaborating with people, because you never know what's going to come out of it. And it was really constructive and enjoyable. And as Rosie said, the book art scene is a very collaborative scene, and there's a lot of fun and learning to be had out there by talking to other people. So that's my contextualizing of the film. So Sian, Rosie, do I pass back to you? Thank you.
Yes, pass back to me. That's wonderful. Thank you for that. I am now going to find your film, which will be helpful, and then share my screen. And there we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful, perfect. Then I shall press play on this, and hopefully we'll be able to hear it as well.
Okay, so we're in the library, and we haven't been able to be in here together since I delivered my book because of COVID. And then Sian and I thought it would be a nice chance to show you the books that inspired my book, and before we work through Measuring the Heavens. So what used to happen was I'd come and see Sian and ask questions, and I became really aware coming in how very little I knew of anything astronomical or any knowledge at all, and it was slightly unnerving to come here. And I came here first with creativity and curiosity artists Ione Parkin and Julian McFarland, and they had very specific things they wanted to look at, but I didn't. So I asked Sian if we could look at some early printing, because one of the things that we have in common is an interest in medieval early printed books. And Sian got me out this amazing book, which I'll let her describe and show you. So it's over to you.
Yeah, so one of the first books that we started to examine was Euclid's geometry. Euclid's Elements of Geometry, I should say. We have several copies of this. There's a really good project actually led by Yelda Nassifoglu, which is like a compilation of all the copies of Euclid's Elements in all the libraries across the country.
Oh, wow.
So this is just one of them, and this is the first printed edition of Euclid's Elements from 1482. So this is what is known as an incunable, and that means a book that was printed before 1500.
And I think, does the Latin literally mean from the cradle? So it's from the birth of printing. And they're, I can just see the page here. And they've, I think they've got historiated coloured images here, which were actually printed and then coloured. So tell me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of the early printing was printed in a way that looked like a manuscript would have been. So this is such new technology that they hadn't yet developed the kind of font that would actually best suit a clear, swift reproduction. Is that a fair?
That is fair. This is a beautiful printed border, but as you say, hand coloured afterwards. Although that said, and also you can see this historiated initial here. Well, not historiated, but certainly decorative initial.
This historiated means actual picture in it, doesn't it? Yeah, so I got that wrong, yeah. But it's got beautiful printed diagrams, and I think that's what's so extraordinary about some of these books, that they're so communicative, in someone's idea, and it's the first time they're actually spreading, aren't they, in printed form.
It is, and the scientific diagrams in this book are particularly important in the history of science and the history of printing, because the printer of this book, Erhard Ratdolt, who worked in Venice and then started printing in Augsburg later in his life, solved the problem of printing precise mathematical, geometrical diagrams in the margins of this book. He was one of the great innovative printers.
And are these, sorry, Sean, are these wood engravings? Is that how they're printed?
Now, I recently went to a really good class taught by Elizabeth Savage, where she actually talked about the way that these diagrams were set. And if I remember correctly, I think she said that these were set with metal type.
Right, because they're so sharp, aren't they? I mean, if you think about how old they are, and they're just, the precision is extraordinary.
Perhaps I can do a fact check on that, but it
sounds right.
I assumed it was woodcut.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So the thing I particularly like, which I'll probably come back to because it just excites me, is the idea that the astronomer would go to the printer and then discuss how it was going to be, and then it had to be realised so accurately. And as an artist, aesthetically, they're incredibly pleasing. But of course, it's the data that's contained within them that's so informative for other astronomers. And that role of printing, spreading that data is quite something. But this is an amazing book. And you think about the centuries it's survived and been looked at, and that it's not an artifact, it's a genuine scientific contribution.
Yeah.
And that's something I really had to learn coming here, because I just wanted to touch all the books because they were beautiful.
It is. It needs some work. It hasn't survived fully intact. You can see that it's crumbling a bit at the edges. I think I should.
I still think that
done here.
It's amazing that this is still here to be looked at, and is so important in the history of astronomy.
And you talked about the legacy of manuscript culture, and you can see that again in the colophon of this text, where basically the printer would imitate the work of a scribe, where at the end of the copying of the manuscript, they would write, this manuscript was finished being copied on this date in this place. So here we have, Euclid of Megara's work on geometry was completed by Erhardus Ratdolt in Augsburg. He was the printer. Oh no, he was of Augsburg, and it was printed in Venice in 1482. So yeah, that is one of those relics of manuscript culture. Although, having said that, Ratdolt was so innovative, he actually started developing the concept of the title page, where we'd have that publication information at the front, beginning. Yeah. Because why not? Because the way that these were printed meant that you could, shuffle the pages in the order that suited the reader and the printer. And
quite a lot of books like this were paid for by subscribers as well, weren't they? So they used to put them names later in the beginning, so you'd know how it was funded, because it's still, despite being printed, it's still an incredibly expensive endeavour. And as a printer, I really like that sense of democratising knowledge through print. But his early books are still very precious items, aren't they? They're just, you know, they still are now. Thank you, Sian, that was beautiful. So that was one of my inspirations, excuse me, of starting off. And that was one of the books where Sian talked to me about the significance of data, as well as the way that the book looked and felt. So what came into the work was just that sense of building blocks. So one astronomer would publish a book and then another would learn from that book and then maybe correct it or challenge it. And sometimes those challenges would run along in parallel. And that was really interesting to me as an artist, because there isn't a sort of absolute right. It's all a contribution to knowledge. So I don't know which one you want to look at next that showed up in my work.
Well, if you're talking about how astronomers built on each other's work and corrected it, then perhaps we could look at Tycho Brahe's work, followed by Kepler, because Kepler was a collaborator of Tycho Brahe when they were both astronomers working at the court of the Holy Roman Emperor in Prague. But Kepler worked with the amazing and accurate data compiled by Tycho, but transformed it into a new paradigm of knowledge. And Tycho was the last great naked eye astronomer who was working before the development of the telescope. And so one of his great achievements was to observe a supernova in 1572, for example. Remember, the telescope wasn't invented until the beginning of the 17th century, a couple of decades later. And, 1572, when Tycho was fully engaged in his trade, this was already a few decades after Copernicus's work published in 1543, the De Revolutionibus, which has that iconic woodcut showing the sun at the center of the solar system. This was a theory that Copernicus was putting forward, but it took a while to gain acceptance, partly because astronomers like Tycho Brahe would make their observations and see that what they observed of the orbits of the planets did not square with a system where the planets go around the sun. It just did not fit the observed data. Let's have a look at this book.
Just stop you to show the cover, which I'm guessing is vellum.
Yes.
And then with the, I will let you do it.
But please take a look.
With this handwritten title on the back. And I just think this is such a beautiful, seductive object, as well as the data, that you just want to touch it.
It is. It's very appealing in a tactile way. And, it's a limp vellum binding. It's
and it has the space for ties, doesn't it? So it probably had vellum ties holding it together. And I think one of the things as an artist working with historical sources is this kind of seduction of old material, and then you have to work out how that relates to your own practice, and is it useful, or is it just the visceral response, and then you can translate it. But these books just have an extraordinary power for me. I'm a book nerd, and I know a lot of other people are as well, but they're just beautiful objects.
So this is one of the books by Tycho Brahe, who was a Danish astronomer who had his own observatory and who made his own fantastic instruments. This title page shows that it was printed at his observatory called Uraniborg, or was that the name of the island? He had his own printing press, basically.
I think, did he have am I making it up, or did he, this island he had, which he was funded for by the emperor who funded it? I don't remember. And then did he have his own paper mill?
Yeah.
I think so. He became it's a kind of whole production of being an astronomer, and then this extraordinary intellectual energy, and making everything so perfect was his thing, wasn't it? It was all very beautiful. Yeah. So it's almost like he created a whole world in which he made the books, had the printing done, and the knowledge was his as well. So it's a very unusual approach.
So it was published posthumously in 1610. And let's turn through the pages. Yep. Can you remember what particularly inspired you about
Well,
this book? Do you want to take a?
Can I just show you
through
that? Because although it's not in my book, I did use this image and make some prints of it, which I haven't done anything with yet. But it did make me think that one of the interesting things, if you're an artist working in a library or in any other source material like this, is the issue of whether you're borrowing images or using them. So I had to get the RAS permission, obviously, the Royal Astronomical Society permission to use images in my work. And it does make you think quite a lot about the appropriateness of borrowing an image that's been designed by somebody else. Mm-hmm. But I think if you look in my book later, but as you bring your own practice to that, it's been such an interesting journey for me collaborating with you, because you know your own world so well, and I know my artist book world, and finding the meeting point has been really interesting. And I think that image just reminded me that's one of the things I think that I'd like to share with other people is that if you do collaboration, it's finding those places where the worlds touch, and not trying to be you and not expecting you to be in the art side of it, and just finding that meeting point. So it's been very lovely to have these physical objects to meet over.
What attracted you about this image? Is it an angel using a trumpet? Or
I couldn't work out exactly who she was, but she looks really strong as a female character, and she just has this kind of rather wonderful. It's quite a detailed, for a frontispiece image. It's quite small with a lot of detail. You do get incredibly detailed big ones, don't you? But it was very. It just seemed like a very strong female image, and I liked the way it was just there on the first page without any particular explanation, which might mean that the contemporary of the person who printed it knew exactly what it was, and I just don't. But again, that's one of the things that's interesting coming into a world where there's so much specific knowledge, and I felt and feel incredibly ignorant. So it's then finding the confidence to feel where might I respond to something. But one of the things I've enjoyed about working with you is feeling that I can ask you things and you don't fall about laughing. I mean, you might go away later and fall about laughing. No, but being allowed to be ignorant with an expert and being able to ask them gives you that kind of confidence of growing a body of knowledge of your own, which is interesting.
But you're an expert in your domain, and you're also asking questions about things that I've never thought about. Like, I don't think I interrogate, the history of art implications of the frontispiece or the title pages and the choices that are made by printers to illustrate them. And the fact is, I'm not an astronomer, and everyone at the Royal Astronomical Society, especially the fellows, has been very patient with my questions as I get to grips with the subject and the collection.
But it's so interesting being a librarian and archivist in a collection like this, because the essential people come to you with specific questions, and they have that expectation that and it must be difficult sometimes to decide where your line is on how far you're going to go into something, or if you can give them an overview. I remember this image as well.
Yeah. This is one of his super sextants, or
it's beautiful.
It's a quadrant, sorry.
And then I think this is the book that I took some of the data charts out of, which appear in my book.
Do you want to have a leaf through?
Yeah, because
in the centre of the book, it's pretty sturdy.
I'll be gentle with it, but we've just passed some. I don't want to flick at these kind of things, because to me they're very difficult to understand. It's a different language, but the energy that's gone into printing, the development of the sort of symbology against the numbers, things that really appealed to me. And again, it came back to this, here you were showing me this extraordinary, beautiful object, and learning that the relevance might not be in my language, might be in the astronomical language. And so trying to reach out and find both of them was really interesting. I wonder if, while it's open, if instead of showing the whole of my book, which I'll do in a moment, but I could just find that little bit to see how those data got used.
That's a good idea.
I don't want to put it on top of your.
Shall I just move this to one side?
Just for a second, and I'll just show so this is sorry, I've got the shadow of the phone a bit, but this is a circle, obviously with a sphere, and we'll come back to where this image comes from. But these are strips of data here from different books, and this here is the I always get this in Tycho Brahe, and you can see some of his numbers coming away and forming. And then this is the Euclid. So there's a kind of I was trying to imply that it was sort of bringing together different bits of data. And then on the back of the book, there are strips. I'm sorry, I'm showing this somewhat out of sequence, but it does kind of make sense if you see the book and then see alongside it,
Right.
which I used as joining strips. And the implication was that it sort of joined pages of my book, because the knowledge is what brings everything together. So yeah, it's the same piece. Beautiful. Still find it really beautiful and very interesting. I wonder if I should hijack and show a bit of my book,
Yeah,
and then we'll
please
go
do.
back so that they join up.
Shall we leave this here or leave?
Only for the height, maybe?
Yeah,
that might be
definitely.
sensible. So this is the, when I first came to the library, by the time, hopefully in the presentation you've been watching, I'll have shown the smaller books that I already made and explained where they came from. But then this is the final piece. And as you can see from the conversations with Sian, the library itself became really important to me, coming and realizing that these books weren't individual artifacts, but they all linked in and created a body of knowledge that was created by the printers in a way as much as the astronomers, because without the power of the printing, these ideas would have stayed in manuscript form and they would have had a much smaller audience. So then I started to think, why not make a book about the library itself? And that's when I asked you if you'd be willing to collaborate as the kind of guardian and key holder to the library. I don't want to say you are the library, but then it's
No.
and so this is what came out of it. And Measuring the Heavens is a direct translation of Johann Bayer's book. I could never quite say Uranometria or Uranometria. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but
No, me neither.
I'll have a look in a moment. We're going to show you that in a minute. So and a lot of what you see in the book is directly from our conversations. So Measuring the Heavens is a boxed book, and I don't know if you can just catch on it that there's a three-dimensional sextant, right word? Yep, for measuring here, which was based on an actual object from the RAS's collection, because you haven't just got books, you've also got amazing objects, haven't you? So telescopes and measuring.
We have a small collection of objects, including a little pocket sextant, which I think is actually smaller than the
It is actually smaller than this, and
Yeah.
it was made in London, wasn't it, by a man called William Carey?
Yes.
And in late 1700s, is that right?
I believe so.
And it's a beautiful little thing. So I said to Sian, I'm going to put dividers on the front of my box, and Sian said, but they're not, the sextant is more relevant. So it was that kind of combination of sort of thinking through things and some practical responses as well. So this is the book, and it sits inside a box, and the idea of the box wasn't to protect it so much as that the box kind of becomes the library, so that it's contained. And just before I take it out, this is a folio at the back about the sources of the book, because it seemed to me really important to acknowledge the individual books that contributed to this and to the library, and in a way to use images from books and not say what they are is sort of pinching, whereas to say these are the things that have inspired me and I've tried to respond in different centuries and different ways to bring it together is a celebration, and it's different. So
Fantastic tribute.
So yeah, it's a tribute. That's a really good word. So this is inside. There's all the sources. I'm sorry about the shadow, but that's life. And that's is a historiated letter from one of the books we're going to see. And then I just laid out the text in a way that was very familiar to people who are used to early books, where people made a lot of nice shapes and responded to that. So every source is referenced here and checked by Sian to make sure that my spelling was correct, let alone my punctuation. And that goes with the book. So there's never a sense that it's kind of without a context. And then as a folio, and the book sits in, and this aperture here is a reference to some very beautiful glass slides that the library has with an astronomer called Warren de la Rue, who photographed, was it mainly the moon?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he was a pioneering astrophotographer who combined his knowledge of astronomy with his expertise in chemistry to develop techniques in capturing the moon and the sun in some of the most accurate photographs of their day. And he became very well known for a series of stereographic photographs of the moon, where people could, there's you see that the circle here, there would actually be two circular sets images of the moon side by side in a slide that people could look at through a stereographic viewer, and it would look three-dimensional, which was quite sensational at the time in the 19th century.
Yeah, and in their own right, they're incredibly beautiful, because they're a sort of pair of very subtle, soft, almost like an aquatint prints that you look through, and you feel like you're holding in your hands the astronomical history, but also just almost like somebody else's eye, and realised in these moon things, and I think they're lovely. So that was a direct reference, and it's nice to put things like that in, which maybe aren't immediately obvious, but are there, and I know they're there. And then the folio opens up inside the box. So the idea was that each part of the book and the box can be seen feeding the other parts, very much like the library. And this is a big part of serpents, which I'll show you in a minute. And then you can fold it back in, and you have this data circle, which actually is easier to see on this than it was on the paper, being fed together. So you've got the stars also from the same book, the Uranometria. So it's kind of, nothing exists on its own, but it is all can exist alone, but it's all within, sorry, it's very badly said, but it's all contextualized by each other, which is what the library feels like to me. And then there's the folio inside that folds out, or a concertina, and you can see the joining strips on the back of data. And then, I don't know if we're going to catch all of this, but there's a serpent, there's the silver head, and his middle and his tail. And when you open the whole book, you get the whole of him. Yeah, you can just see it stretching out across. And he's directly from an engraving in Johann Bayer's Uranometria, but he's by an engraver called Alexander Mayer. And I did struggle with my conscience as using him, because he's so beautiful, and I didn't initiate him. I borrowed him. I have changed him a bit. I've moved things around a bit. But then I just started to think, well, this is, you know, if you walked into a lecture theatre and this was on the screen several hundred years after he engraved it, well, if I was the artist, I'd be very pleased. So I felt my conscience was slightly abated. But he's so wonderful, and he really sums up the beauty of some of these books, the wildness, the constellation, the dreams we all have who are not astronomers, that what stars might mean metaphorically and in literature and stories. And yet all of these are actual star positions, and the numbering and lettering system used in that book was the first to put it in those positions so clearly for following astronomers. So again, he encapsulates both the beauty, but also the importance and significance of the data. But he is particularly fine, and I really like the idea that Johann Bayer will have gone along to the printer and sat there, and they've worked out all of these things. I wish I could be a fly on the wall for that moment. So that's the influence of the books, and that's my book about the library.
Right. Let's see. There we go. Are we all back? Wonderful. Okay. I believe that Kate and Sian have one
Rosie, sorry to interrupt, but there should be a little bit more of the film, because there's a very wonderful book next, and I think that maybe my bad editing, I just saw a glimpse on screen of something of the kind of controls at the bottom, but there's a wonderful book called Astronomicum Caesarium.
It seems to have come to a close.
Right.
See if I can find it and find out.
If you don't, it's not the end of the world. It's a separate section, but it's got some colours that other artists might really appreciate. Some of the. Let's have a look. Otherwise, I can see if I can get it on my screen. So
no, it's come to a close on me.
Okay, let me just see if I can do that. If you might mind talking amongst yourself for a moment.
So we'll let Kate find that, and then I believe they have one last little epilogue to add at the end there, after Kate's found that, after which we will have time for questions. And I don't know about all of you, but
I don't have it at the moment either, which I'm very sorry about, but they did get to see the main body of it. So yeah, I'm sorry, that's obviously a technical hitch. It should be attached to the end, and it isn't. So I'm not quite sure why, but apologies.
Rest of the video was absolutely
okay. you got the main point.
So just say that was the way it was supposed to be.
That's the way it's supposed to be. That was perfect ending. So.
Absolutely thrilling. So don't worry about it. I believe one of you had something you wanted to add at the end about.
We just wanted to raise the possibility of our next collaboration, because I think it's interesting for people to think about collaborating and how you might expand on it. So we're going to hopefully work with Gillian McFarlane from Creativity and Curiosity on the astronomer Caroline Herschel. And if I let Sian tell you about Caroline Herschel, and then I'll come back for 2 minutes and just say what we're thinking of doing, then that would be great. So I'm just going to mute.
Sure, thank you very much. So this is a potential future collaboration inspired by one of the really important early women astronomers whose works are actually represented in the Herschel papers, which are held at the Royal Astronomical Society. Caroline Herschel was born in 1750 in Hanover in Germany. She was one of the youngest of a large family, and she seemed to be destined to spending her life providing domestic assistance to her mother, to her parents, until at the age of 22, her brother, William Herschel, who by that time had set himself up as a music teacher and composer in Bath, invited her to come over and act as his housekeeper, which was liberating for her. He was from a military musician background and was now working as an independent musician in his own right. And he trained Caroline as a singer, and her career as a soloist showed early promise. But in the meantime, William had become incredibly interested in astronomy to the extent that he was not satisfied with the telescopes that were on the market. He was buying books on optics and working out how to make his own telescopes. And it became an all-consuming passion for him. And she was strongly encouraged by him to assist him with his observation work, which he carried out in the back garden of what is now the Herschel Museum in Bath, where you can see the workshop in this slide that Kate's put together, where William assembled the telescopes, and she would do things like sieve dung, which is used as to create a mold for the metal speculum mirrors that were made for these reflecting telescopes. So gradually, William, you might know, really made a name for himself when he discovered a new planet, the first human for hundreds of years to discover a new planet in the solar system, now known as Uranus, but at the time named Georgium Sidus, the Georgian planet in honor of the present king. And he was able to become a full-time astronomer thanks to royal patronage, and she became practically a full-time assistant, really, but also developed very strong astronomical research skills and observational skills in her own right. And one time her brother was out of town, she had to have a go on the 7-foot telescope, I believe it was, and she discovered a comet, the first of 5 or maybe 8, depending on how you count. She also discovered many nebulae, which are very difficult to see, cloudy, tiny smudges of cloud, which are known now to be supernovae or clouds of interstellar gas and dust. So she was a great astronomer in her own right, but she also played a crucial role in organising and systematizing the programme of observations made by her brother over his lifetime, and making it possible to develop his work into usable catalogues and data upon which other astronomers built. And she was recognised for her work in 1828, when she was given the first she was the first woman to be given the gold medal by the Royal Astronomical Society. As an aside, the next woman to be given the gold medal was Vera Rubin in the 1990s. And she was the first woman alongside Mary Somerville to be elected as an honorary member. And yeah, we're very lucky indeed to have her manuscripts of her observations in the Royal Astronomical Society. And I've been able to share these to an extent with Kate and with Gillian McFarland, but there's so much more that can be done. And I'll hand over to Kate, who will expand a bit more on this very exciting project.
Thanks, Sian. I think what has come out of this is that each artist brings their own particular practice to a collaboration. And Gillian's working a lot with glass, and obviously I'm working with books. And we have Sian as our fantastic lead in the RAS, who's going to guide us, hopefully, through Caroline Herschel and her work. And we want to work on Caroline Herschel because she is an extraordinary astronomer and because she is a woman. She's been not forgotten in any way, as Sian has made clear, but at the same time, there is more to explore in her work. And particularly as an artist, I enjoy her notebooks, which are from direct observation. So the ways in which she's written things down, the drawings that she's made, the notations, although there is some question that Sian and I have been discussing as to whether the ones that we see are actually sort of neat versions, perhaps done a little bit later. But it's this sense of somebody capturing in ink and in pencil new astronomy. And in the books that I've been reading about her, the first comets were amazing that she discovered them. It was her brother who made the announcements, and she was very much in the background, even though she was the discoverer. And then by the later comet she discovered, she actually got on a horse and rode herself through the night to register it with the I don't think, was it the Royal Astronomical Society then, to say that she had made the discovery.
Might have been the Astronomer Royal in Greenwich.
Astronomer Royal, thank you. And it changed from this sort of rather meek image of a sort of background woman to someone who wanted her own name to be associated and to recognise a woman's achievements. So Jill and I are talking about making work which combines glass and books with possible lenses and the progression of time through the book by movement. And it's yet to come, but we're trying to put it together now and hope to get funding to go forward with it. So that's where we are with the Royal Astronomical Society, and what came from a sort of invitation to go and research something I knew nothing about has grown into a really interesting part of my life, and thanks mostly to Sian. And it's been wonderful. So thank you for listening while we share it.
Thank you so much for sharing it. I wish we were in a room all together so that you could hear the round of applause that I would follow that, because it would be huge. And thank you for going to the amount of effort to make that video and give us an actual glimpse into the library and to those books, and showing us them like that, so we could actually see the pages of such stunning and important pieces being turned. That's extraordinarily special. I'm sure everybody else here would agree. So we have time now for some questions. I don't know about everybody else, but I know I have some. But before I ask them, if anybody would like to either into the chat or unmute themselves and ask in person, please do. And otherwise I don't want to hog the floor. So before I ask any, I'm going to just give a minute for anybody else to jump in with a question. No? Okay. Well, perhaps if I ask one first, it might prompt other people too. Because I can't imagine people haven't come away with something they want to ask or comment on. So where to start? Sian, you said at the beginning of your talk, you used the phrase building a relationship of trust with Kate once she'd come into the library, which I thought was a beautiful phrase. And I was wondering if having built that relationship and sort of seen what the books that you care for led Sian to create, whether that changed the way that you see any part of the library. the impact Sian's work might have had on how you see the books in your care or the library in your care.
I think it's, as I said in the video, it has prompted me to think more about the history of art dimension of what we have. And yeah, as we also say in the video, we're both we both have a background in medieval studies, and one of the big themes of medieval studies is intertextuality, which is something that I love to think about, but it was in terms of, you know, different applications of the Troy legend through the centuries. But seeing Kate interact with these books in, you know, she was like making a living, breathing model of the history of science. It's a beautiful working diagram, I suppose similar to, we don't have any of these versions of Euclid, but you might have seen copies of Euclid where the polygons and the solids can be assembled into 3D images with the fold-out flaps and the pages. The Royal College of Physicians has these has some of these copies, and they've probably made GIFs and things available on YouTube and on Twitter. And yeah, just really, it's always a pleasure and always great to be reminded to anchor yourself in the physicality of these books. And, you know, I started working at the Royal Astronomical Society, and it was all about the discipline. It's like we support the study of astronomy and geophysics. And I think I was concentrating almost too much on the content and trying to understand that. But yeah, not working with Kate, what I've been doing is facilitating Kate's research and practice, but seeing the result of that has really, not just for me, but for my colleagues and for other users of the library who've been able to come in and see the books. It's just really brought things to life in that really beautiful physical but also intellectual way.
Wonderful. I'm not in the slightest bit surprised, but I'm very glad that it did have a impact in return. One of the things I know as an artist who has worked collaboratively with people outside of the arts is that it's a blessing when something you've made gives something back to the people who inspired and facilitated and gave so much to you to be able to create your work, that you know that they've taken something from it is a joy. And I don't know if Kate agrees, but so Dee has put in the comments how wonderful it was to see the source material and to hear about Kate's creative process and the creative interpretation. And I wanted to say thank you to Kate for sharing the glimpses you did of the work in progress, your sketches and your the beginnings of those pieces, because it's not something all artists want to share with the world. They're not the bit that we put out there. And you, as you were doing that, you were talking about working with screen printing and screen printing coming from an industrial process. And I wondered if sort of that interest of yours, along with the interest of sort of making contemporary things in response to history, was part of what led you to say sort of yes to working with something that was science-based. Like, not all artists would find inspiration in going towards the sciences. But if you'd had an interest in the industry from which your work had come.
A really interesting question. I hadn't thought of it like that, but yes, I am interested in technology, old technologies. I've been interested in early printing for a long time, and I am a screen printer, which is often considered a sort of, in the fine print book world, a sort of poor man's version. As my work is not posh enough to be fine press, but is too fine sometimes to be like a digital. I don't mean fine in the terms of too special. I mean literally, hand making is my thing, but hand making through a process that is democratized print, it really does interest me. So I think when I went to the library, I think that history of print becoming available through books, because I have studied some medieval history, the notion that manuscripts were made by hand in a scriptorium and then sent to various people, and that became a commercial venture. But you imagine, you know, how much a book was worth, and maybe 40 people would use a book. Well, when there's suddenly 1,000 of that book, that is a diaspora of knowledge. And I can kind of love the idea in my head of seeing it just spreading through the world through print. And so I do like the idea of being a fine artist who makes artist books, but with that industrial process, so that I can spread my ideas. And I like doing the book fairs like Turn the Page, where somebody can take away something that I have maybe spent a lot of time preparing and making and stick it in their pocket for not a huge amount of money. Of course, I would like it if they were much more expensive and I got much more money back for what I make. But on the other hand, I love the idea that I've got work in collections now, but really I've got in public collections, but I've also got a lot of work in people's bookshelves and in boxes. And I think that that's great. So to be able to bring that mindset to such extraordinarily special books and try and look at it that way around is like, well, how did this knowledge get out of this object was particularly interesting. And I'd just like to say that although Sian, of course, facilitated, she very much did work alongside me. With the conversations that we had were absolutely central to what came out of it.
Wonderful, thank you. Now Dee had her virtual hand raised, so I'm going to see if she wants to unmute herself. And
Can you? Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Indeed.
Hello.
Hello.
It's lovely to see you all. Kate, I was really empathizing with what you were saying about the beauty of the books as objects, the source material that you were looking at. And I've come at book arts from a very different angle, because I'm actually a book and paper conservator. And I've just wondered what effect that response that you had of them as an object of artistic beauty, did you find that inspired your own creativity, or was it a barrier?
I really am a book nerd, so I think for me, yeah, their beauty, it wasn't a barrier. That I think perhaps from the conservator point of view, there's a specialness which makes you very self-conscious about physically handling them, and that can make you feel, when you're making a piece of work about them, that I wanted a little bit of that in the work. So I didn't want to put people off touching my work, but I didn't want it to be an edition of 40. I wanted it to be something that had borrowed some of that preciousness from the books, to kind of, so you have to sort of think, oh, I'm going to touch this, and it's an exciting thing to touch it, to get your hand on it, that sort of haptic quality. Mm-hmm. And so that side of it was definitely inspiring. The beauty of them is just, I mean, they're just knockout things, you know. And if Sian wasn't there, I might spend more time sniffing them, but I don't want to do anything I shouldn't do.
Or reading the marginalia.
Or reading the marginalia, which the exhibition at the Bodleian had a lot of English marginalia in, which was wonderful. So I think one thing that is really nice, though, is, as I said in the film, coming to work with somebody who doesn't mind what level your question is. So, you know, I think if you can find somebody in the world in which you're interested in, who can allow you access through their generosity, and not feel that your ignorance is a barrier, but in fact might be quite useful, because you may ask questions in a way that they haven't thought of. And then, of course, they may answer you in a way that you've never thought of. So you have to both be open. You can't just come up with lots of clever questions. So I think the beauty was almost a way in, because that's what I do. I'm visual, I'm aesthetic, that's my seduction. And then to kind of, once you've got in, to kind of think about the books themselves as objects and things, was just magical. And, you know, without the conservatives, they wouldn't still be there. So wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dee. That was a great question. So we've also got a comment here from Chris saying, beautiful how so much information was condensed into a visual and an educational form, which I would echo. the thing that led me to entirely on a selfish basis invite you both to speak was how beautiful the books looked, even though I hadn't got to see them in person, about how dense they looked and how much I wanted to know about what I was seeing, because it was very clear that there was a huge amount that had been packed into what you'd created, Kate. And I love the way you talk about the fact that had come out of an understanding about the way that the library functions and that building of knowledge. And I was wondering if that was something you already had as a thought from other visits and working with other libraries, or was that something that occurred to you uniquely based on the library at the Astronomical Society?
I think that was coming from the Royal Astronomical Society, and I think I'd never been to a library before. I've not got a scientific background, and this sense of layering up knowledge. So we all know as artists that we've looked at a lot of other artists' work, and that you can resist it, but you're sort of informed by it quite often, sometimes without realizing, and sometimes realizing. And I wasn't aware before of how significant the interleaving of knowledge, printing, and these books were. And Sian was really informative on that, in a sense, both intellectually by talking about it, but also showing me the annex, which she gave you a glimpse into. And I know that there's also, other spaces in the building where some of these books are kept very safely. And so the library is a physical entity made up of so many parts. And I kind of, the more I looked at those original books for my first 3 small books, the more I was thinking, yeah, these are fantastic, but they're not alone. And it's the not aloneness that matters in the progress of the astronomy, but also in the progress of printing. Because, if astronomers are going to printers saying, I want you to put a serpent and I want you to put a tiny little star just there, not even a millimeter to the left, and then I want you to put a table to inform that picture, then the printers are having to step up to do that. And then the next astronomers looking at that, but again, well, I don't agree with that from my observation. So there's a whole wonderful interplay there. And that was the first time I'd really thought about that. So it was a real education in ways I didn't expect to be educated. I am very poor on my sciences, but it has made me more enthusiastic to learn more. So.
Amazing. I wanted to say that when you were talking about the struggle or conversation you had with yourself about using the serpent image as one that wasn't your own, and imagining, well, if you were an artist and 100 years later it was being used again, then you'd be quite happy. That seems to me that it's a extension of exactly what you're talking about, and that interleaving, building on, and the next astronomer coming on and saying, well, actually I've seen something else and I'm going to build on, and that your using of the serpent from that long ago is simply the next step in that process.
Yeah.
And if I were him, we can only imagine. It wouldn't seem that weird to me that had happened, because surely it was part of a wider conversation that he was having with people in the first place. So
it's a nice way of looking at it. Yeah.
So does anybody else have anything they want to throw into the chat, or want to unmute themselves, or raise a hand, or shall I ask my last question and then see if anybody else has anything? Okay. So interesting that you say that you're not sort of particularly up on your sciences, and was that why you said yes to the collaboration, or was it that made you nervous when you were asked by creativity?
It made me really nervous. My first response was, but I don't know anything about astronomy. And then my next was to go and buy a Dorling Kindersley book for children on astronomy, because I just think that's where you should always start, where there's no assumption of knowledge. So I have a nice book collection of kids' books on astronomy. It did make me really nervous. And I think that's actually quite an interesting point if you're going to collaborate, which I'm sure you know lots about, is that you can only take yourself. Whereas I kind of was worried that I wouldn't be good enough to engage at the right level. And it was obviously any astronomical knowledge about the books or history books I have has been facilitated by Sian, but it's really okay to be ignorant as long as you're aware of it. So I think that's the thing that I took out of it, was it's okay not to know, as long as you're interested and you care about it and you're open to what might happen. And obviously the book side drew me in completely. But the astronomical side did make me very nervous. I do, like most artists, get kind of, oh, I'm on my mettle, I'm here, I don't know quite what I'm doing, and I don't know where I stop and this project starts. And in the end, I think you can go in lots of ideas, but you end up just doing what you do because that's who you are and it's all you can take with you. So yeah, it did make me scared, but I quite liked the fear when I got there.
And Sian, were you aware that the people coming in to collaborate with you that they weren't coming with any particular knowledge of the subject? Did that make you nervous, or were you like happy to welcome them into the building? And
I'm happy to welcome everyone. If anything, I would feel nervous because these are artists coming in, and am I going to be able to find material that meets their expectations? Have I understood their questions properly? Am I making assumptions? When I started working as a librarian, we'd have training in the reference interview technique, which is just, and I'm not saying that I'm terribly good at this, it's basically listening to someone making an inquiry or reading the email as it often comes in, and making sure that you're not assuming what they want to know, but really drilling down into what they need to know. I hope that just based on the response of Kate and Gillian so far, I'm so happy with the creative approach that they've taken, because it's such a different approach to the scientific method, isn't it? But I'm still learning a lot about the scientific method as well. I'm from a humanities background. I did evening classes in astronomy, and I just had this idea that the more sources you read, the more different textbooks, the better the homework I'll compile. But actually, they were like, no, listen, this is the equivalent of a first year undergraduate course. You just have to absorb and understand the slides that we've given you. Don't start branching out, just get the basics right. And I was like, oh yeah, that's the humanities getting in the way of some quite basic fundamental science there. Just it's very interesting to see all these, the interplay between disciplines. And you just have to be open-minded and take everyone. I just want to treat everyone first class, basically.
This is why we love librarians.
Librarians love artists.
And so I am very lucky, interestingly, to have a Sian of my own, who is a research scientist at the Marine Institute in Plymouth University, who has wonderfully welcomed me and collaborated with me on projects and introduced me to a whole other world that I knew nothing about. And so I completely recognize Kate's idea of finding an expert with whom you can be ignorant, and who is perhaps ignorant of what you do, and a place where your phrase, Kate, was where the two worlds can touch, and I think that's absolutely beautiful as a phrase, and that the piece of work you have created from the touching of yours and Sian's worlds is exquisite, and I hope that we can find space to share it at Turn the Page next year so that people can see it in person. I'm going to unmute Dee again because she's raised her virtual hand. So I shall see what wonderful questions she has to add, and then if anybody else has anything to add, they can, and otherwise I will wrap us up.
It was just on the end of that discussion to say that for me as an observer, one of the things that really struck me about Kate's presentation was, I think, because she wasn't entering into it as a scientist, there was a fascinating moment where she talked about the library itself and the interaction of all of this knowledge within the context of the library. And that's something that when you're the keeper of the knowledge within these libraries, it's woods and trees, isn't it? You don't always appreciate the value of the context within which that sits, and how the facility that you're looking after is facilitating the holding and sharing of this knowledge. And that was just something about Kate's presentation that really jumped out at me, as something that might not have come into this conversation if she'd gone into it with a scientific background. So it was really just an observation rather than a question.
Thank you very much, Dee. You're absolutely right. For sure, I think there's something to be said for that, for going into spaces where you do not know anything, and where you are not an expert in the subject of the knowledge that those spaces contain. Otherwise, perhaps you'd go in with presumptions, which would prevent the worlds that Kate so beautifully phrased from meeting each other, and would, I'm sure, have resulted in a beautiful book in its own right from somebody else entirely, but wouldn't have been the one that we've got to sit in splendor and wonder with this afternoon. Okay, we have a raised hand from Chris, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
I just really wanted to say thank you. I can write it, but I just actually wanted to say it. So thank you so much. It's been really fascinating, really interesting, lots to think about, and can't wait to see what happens next. You know, do come back, bring it to Turn the Page. We want to see it. You know, so thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That's lovely. That is the joy of the ability to unmute people. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people saying thank you in the chat, so that's very nice. I just wanted to say, thank you so much for giving up, or not giving up, for coming and sharing a few hours with us and being willing to do that on your Saturday afternoon. It was much appreciated. And for being willing to give us a glimpse into the potential of a next stage of collaboration. I know that those fledgling ideas aren't always easy things to share with public, so we feel very blessed to have got a glimpse of where you might be going next. And I'm sure everybody else here would echo my all fingers and all toes crossed that you get the funding to be able to do it, because I for one want to know what a book about such an extraordinary woman that uses book art and glass and movement and time and other wonderful things looks like. I definitely want the results of that project, so I can only hope that funding bodies do as well. And yeah, just the biggest of thank yous, and I shall be putting my hand up while we have meetings about how we're going to put Turn the Page together next year, for getting you a plinth or a cabinet or something to put that book in, so that we all get to look at it in person. And thank you for everybody else who has come along today and who has listened and who's written such beautiful things in the chat and contributed to the conversation. We have people from all over the world, which is one of the joys of Zoom, and why I did it in the afternoon. So there are some people here from the US and so forth. This has been recorded, so anybody that desperately wanted to be able to press pause and rewind and look at the beautiful books in Kate's videos on slow motion or so on and so forth, you will be able to do that. And for any book artists in the audience or other creatives, it is Turn the Page's 10-year anniversary next year, and we are running a competition on the theme of the number 10 that's open for anybody that would like to enter it. And the entrances will be shown at the fair, and there's a prize for the winners, and you can find all the details of that on the website and on our social media platforms. So do come and follow us and have a look and contribute your wonderful artwork, so that when Turn the Page returns to a physical space next year, it can do so with as much of a bang and celebration as is possible. And just one more thank you and big virtual and real in separate rooms around the world round of applause to Kate and Sean.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
My pleasure, absolute pleasure. All right then, and I will just hover here. People can exit for themselves. I'm not going to like end it to kick people out. I always find that a bit abrupt. So let's all just leaving a room, and if anybody wants to ask another question or unmute themselves, they can. But I'll just sit here for 5 minutes rather than hitting end meeting, because I'm always a bit shocked when that happens. But I am going to stop the recording. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rosie.